Welcome back to Around the Cauldron, where we talk theology, philosophy, and everyday life as a modern witch. Today I had the pleasure of sitting down with Mael Brigde, author, teacher, and Brigid Devotee, and we talked about her new book that is coming out at the end of August of this year, 2021, or the beginning of September. It just really depends on where you are in the world. So I hope you enjoy this interview and enjoy hearing Mael talk about her book and how Brigid plays in her life and some of her most beloved stories about Brigid. So thank you so much, Mael Brigde, for being with me today around the Cauldron. Barring any more tech issues, it has been a mission the last 20 minutes to get this to work right. Hello, how are you?
Hello, thank you. I'm fine. A little
wonderful.
But yeah. I think it's working now. So
we're working through it right now. So for anybody that's listening and for those watching on YouTube, I have brought Mael Brigde on the podcast and on the channel to talk about her new book. I'll let her talk a little bit about it some more, but her book is a Brigid devotional. And so, that's right up my alley. And I'm slowly working my way through it, reading a couple of them daily, and I really enjoy it so far. Will you please tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
All right. Well, I live in Canada. I'm a Canadian, so that's an important thing to know about me. I've been a devotee of Brigid since the early 80s. And started the Daughters of the Flame about 10 years later. So initiated a flame tending group in Brigid's name. And I just everything seems to be Brigid. I had other interests at one time. And I think I still do, but I've just, for the last couple of decades, I've been just more and more involved with all things Brigid.
It seems to go that way sometimes. It starts out as just a little spark, and then it's a raging fire, right?
Yeah. I remember thinking when I started the Daughters of the Flame that I would really try to do it for 3 years. But if it only worked for a year, that was okay. And even with getting to know Brigid, I thought, okay, it's like with my Irish ancestry. There's other deities out there. There are other streams in me, so I'll splash around in this one for a while and then move on. No.
Yeah, no, it doesn't seem to work that way. So you said decades. When did you first find Brigid, or when did she first find you?
It was the early 80s. I can't remember exactly when, maybe 83, something like that. And I think I had about that big of a paragraph in a book to read about her. I'd never heard of her before because in the particular part of Canada where I live, she's just not a big thing. We've got a St. Patrick's church, but we don't have a St. Brigid's church or school or anything. So I didn't know about her. And St. Patrick never turned my crank. So I was wanting to be involved with a goddess, preferably, but at any rate, a deity who was not a Christian deity, who was not a monotheistic entity. And I came across Inanna and Nisaba and, other very foreign to me, but very cool deities. But what I really wanted was one that I could connect to culturally. So there would be some part of me that would go, yeah, I understand this, right? And so when I found out about Brigid, I latched on to her.
That sounds about right. And so did you start writing poetry as you started working with her? Has poetry always been part of your life, or did it sort of come after Brigid? Because she does have that aspect of being of the bards, basically.
Mm-hmm. When I was quite young, like a kid, I used to write some poetry. But I was surprised to learn that my mother and her friends who were over for coffee didn't really want me to stand there reading my poetry to them. So with that blow to my poetic self, I dropped it. And any writing I did after that was more fiction or essay form or whatever. Mm-hmm. Although, because I didn't have, let me just set the stage. Everyone's heard this before, but in the early 80s, there was obviously no internet, but there also wasn't the groundswell of paganism that there was even before the internet started. This was in the dark days of the before times. And what goddess movement there was, I didn't know much about. In fact, it was a friend of mine who bought me the Women's Encyclopedia of Myths and Secrets. And that was the first I had ever heard that such a thing existed. And that was where I got this paragraph. But then when I went on to try and find out more about her, obviously I went to the library. Where else would you go? Mm-hmm. And I found might have been, I think it was a whole chapter in a Lady Gregory's Book of Saints and something or others. And one whole book by Alice Curtain, an Irish writer from the 50s, which is still actually quite a good book. And it's a miracle that I found that, but that was all I had to go on for that one paragraph or two paragraphs, and those two photocopied books for a long time. And by now I've forgotten what the question was, so I'm just kind of rambling.
That's okay. I was just asking about your poetry, because you also have a blog and you write. So I was just wondering where that love of words comes from. But you kind of answered it when you were talking about being a kid and then realizing that they didn't really want you to stand there and read your poetry to them.
I know. I've never talked to her about that. But there is a little bit more to the poetry story, which is that, and this is why I started talking about Nisaba and Inanna. Mm-hmm. I did have to, well, I didn't have to, but I chose to write little poems, praise poems, just a couple, because I didn't have access to anything else. Mm-hmm. So I did write one about Nisaba and Inanna. And when I found Brigid, I stuck her in there too. But I didn't write a lot. I would write rituals later on when I had a friend who was a pagan, where I'm like, oh my heavens, this exists. Hallelujah. So we started getting together for rituals and whatnot. And so I would write rituals, and that, a lot of that is poetry, really. Mm-hmm. So basically my entry back into poetry was writing stuff for devotion. And but it wasn't until 2011, I think, when I found out that I had cancer, that I started to write a lot of poems. I to Brigid, mm-hmm. starting off with like help, and then just kind of I just started learning more and more about her and seeing the ways that she was working in my life all the time. And I don't know what happened, but cancer pulled this plug out in me. And in a lot of ways, actually, it got me out of a sort of semi-depressed state into a much more alive state. You know, there's nothing like thinking you might die to realize how much you want to be alive. And I think writing poetry and learning more about her was a part of that reawakening, right?
Yeah, that sounds about on par, I think, because I wrote poetry as a preteen, as a teenager. I was a very depressed child, and poetry has always been there. It's something that I wrote when I didn't have the physical words to really express what I was feeling. So I would write it all down. I wish I still had some of it, because during those times I'm like, oh, I don't want anybody to read this ever. So I don't have them anymore.
Right.
But I still heavily connect with Brigid through poetry. And you know, every so often she'll get a new poem from me. Sometimes when I need something a little extra, she'll get a new poem plus something else, but it's always poetry. So what inspired you to compile all of these poems together into a devotional book? Was it divinely inspired, like, or did you just want to have a place to put all of it?
I think, well, who knows how many things it was, but one thing was that I wanted a book. Like sometimes when I sit down at my altar to spend some time with her, you know, I'm from everywhere else. My brain is everywhere else. I'm having emotions that maybe are not tied to what I'm trying to do. So for me, having something contemplative, something written down that I can kind of immerse myself in, helps get me to that more grounded place. And so I wanted to have that book, but I didn't. So I wrote
the book you needed.
I did.
You wrote the book you needed.
And Moon Books is very kindly printing it for me.
Yes. I am excited to have a physical copy of it soon.
Yeah. So that was part of it. Also, I just had all of these poems, and I just thought maybe somebody else would have some use for all of this. You know, I have all of these poems. I might as well put them together. So I spent a few years writing, but also taking them to writing groups and having them critiqued. And then I knew that I wanted to, there was other stuff that I wanted to say that wasn't sayable in poetry. Like, to back up a bit, one of the reasons that poetry worked so well for me for writing about her is that when I played around with writing her in fiction, which is my normal go-to, I realized I had to shave her down to almost nothing in order to make her be consistent throughout the book, because there's so many different sides to Brigid, right? So many different sides even to the saint, or so many different sides to the goddess, you know, that I didn't want to pack her down that small, which isn't to say it's wrong to do, but it just wasn't what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be focused. I wanted to be everything that came into my mind. I wanted to be able to express that about her. But there are still other things that can't reasonably be expressed in poetry, right? So I wanted to write about those things too. So this book that started off as a lot of poetry grew with various essays and introductions and a huge to me who wrote it, glossary and extended notes for a lot of the poems. Like, not every single poem has a note, but between the two of them, the glossary and the notations are quite a few pages. And then I also thought, well, there are certain issues in Brigidom that come up for me a lot when I read what other people say about her, or whatever or when people ask me questions
Mm-hmm.
and things that I learned. For instance, I learned from Aaron, Rowan, Laurie that the perpetual flame was not actually limited to Saint Brigid in Ireland. So I'm stopping myself from launching into that whole thing, but I will say that I wanted to explore that idea with people as well. So there are
Mm-hmm.
several essays, but I also wanted to give people resources, because I see, at the time I thought, am I trying to do too many things for one book? But I don't think I was. I wanted there to be an inspirational side to it, a contemplative side, but I also wanted there to be an educational side, because that's what people want. Like, we want to learn as much as we can about her, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to have that in there. So I've also got a bibliography and resource lists, and that might, oh yes, and a daily devotional as well. So I tried to gather together all of the things that I would have liked to have to help me out.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, just say it all.
That's a lot.
That was a lot of work. Oh my heaven.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you're talking about, like, are you trying to do too many things with it? And in my head, I'm like, well, I don't think there are too many, like, you can't possibly do too many things with it, because Brigid is all those things, not just like one or two or three. And I think it would be impossible to pack everything in one book in general, because it's just a lot. So you mentioned that you found her through a paragraph, and over time she has just become an everyday part of your life. Do you have a specific daily practice that you do? Like, I know for me, I always light a candle. Sometimes I'll say a prayer, sometimes I won't. It just really depends on how I'm feeling that day. But I always at least say thank you. And then anytime that I'm creating something, be it writing, crochet, if I'm sewing or whatever I'm doing, I always mentally say a prayer to her, because that's part of her domain for me, is the craftiness.
Mm-hmm. Anything to do with motherhood as well?
Yeah, anything to do with motherhood as well. She's yelling at the cat. Anyway, do you have any sort of daily practice that you are comfortable sharing?
Mm-hmm. Well, I stuck it in the book. So, and in fact, putting it in the book made me define it even more clearly.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that was good. I use the word daily rather freely
Mm-hmm.
in this context, because, yeah, there are a lot of things that can bump me off of what I like to do.
Mm-hmm.
But what I aim to do, and it often will happen, I have a yoga class several mornings a week. And so those days, it's pretty easy to transition straight from that into doing my practice, because for the first time in my life, I have a little room. I have my bed in the only other room, because I wanted to have this little room as a sanctuary. So that's where I can do yoga, although I'm always having to move back and forth because it's not a very big room. And right there are altars and religious art and things like that. So it's my room where I can go and just find that place I was talking about before. And so I do have a number of different things, and I have modeled it on a morning practice from a Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Zen Buddhist monk. So from his Plum Village tradition, they have a practice that I have really enjoyed doing. But I wanted it to be focused on Brigid. So I just took the basic ideas, like getting centered in your body, a little bit of praise and acknowledgement, returning to your breath, a whole bunch of different things that they have in there, getting stable in your seat. That I really benefit from starting off that way. So I created poetry for Brigid to take those steps. So I go through those stages, and it can be done in just a couple of minutes, but I always seem to take quite a bit longer because I like to really stop and embody what I'm saying. I try not to just say it quickly. And it takes, I don't know what it is about me, but it takes some real concentration for me to focus into the words. So I do those. Well, I start off by ringing the bell and lighting the candle, and I bow, because that's a way that I can really acknowledge that I'm honoring this deity, this saint, and this place where we gather together. And then when all of that is finished, I might just sit in quiet meditation, or I also read a couple of, or one poem from my book, which seems so weird to do.
Well, it's your writing.
It is. So I find it interesting. And not all of the poems are really inspiring, but there's still things that they might just kind of come at me from left field, like, oh yeah, that's kind of a downer, or yeah, interesting or funny, so I just sit with that, with whatever it is that's coming today. I sit with that for a while. I have a little song that I sing, that kind of thing. So as you can see, this can grow to be quite a long affair, or it can be quite short. And that's the beauty of it for me. I can, even if all I do is bow, invite the bell to sound, light the candle, sit down and say, I think you're great, Brigid. I still, that brings me into the day in a much better way.
Yeah, I think instead of daily practice, we should say consistent practice.
Right.
Because you're right, sometimes the days flow together, or sometimes we wake up with 5 minutes to get ready to go where we need to go, and life just happens. I think consistent would be a better word.
or even just chosen, because I'm not always that consistent either. But I always get back to it,
Yeah. Well, and I find that Brigid comes in cycles anyway. At least for me, she does. So it sort of brings everything full circle for me to do things consistently or daily for a long stretch of time, and then just sort of like, okay, this doesn't feel like I need to do it as often, and then okay, maybe I don't need to do it at all, and then come back to it like, okay, now I got to do it every day. She seems to come in cycles in my life. Is that something that you notice with her too? Maybe it's just me.
Earlier, but I seem so immersed in her now that it's less like that. Like she's here all the time. But I've completely forgot to say the most consistent practice that I've had for, it's creeping on towards 30 years, although it's not that yet, is tending her flame every 20 days. So for 24 hours, I tend the flame, and I might do it in different ways, but I do it. And if I can't do it, I ask someone else to fill in for me. And And I have even been known to forget. Still, after all this time, I am capable of forgetting. But it is the most consistent practice I probably have ever had about anything.
Yeah, I try to be consistent with the candle too. Sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I run out of candles and then I feel really weird as a witch with no candles. But
That'd be a nice poem.
right? A witch without candles. One of one of the poems that I wrote for her was basically about the transformation and being laid flat on her anvil as things just kind of crumble and change around me. Very deep and heavy in introspection and digging into shadows and who I am versus who people see. Do you connect with any aspect of that sort of transformative energy that she can bring into people's lives?
Oh yeah.
And I guess, how do you see that connection?
I mean, I am very aware. I think of that primarily as the smith aspect, although it isn't just. I mean, the healer and even the poet. I mean, they all can lead down those kinds of transformational corridors. But I'm certainly aware of less pretty aspects of Brigid. I mean, you don't forge swords just for cutting daisies, right?
Yeah.
Like, some pretty horrible things can happen with swords. And I think we tend, at least the iconography that I've seen around the smith and the sword in paganism has mostly been really this is about strength in transformation, and that's really important to me as well. But it also, I think we need to recognize that there are destructive ways in ourselves of using our weaponry, right? And that it's not always a positive thing, and then we need to look at that. I was just reading in my book the other day. Oh yeah. Anyway, I think it was yesterday. I read one that I think it's called "Brigid Speaks with the Sword," and it's about that. It's about not just the negative, but it's about all the good and wonderful things to do with smithcraft, and of the terrible consequences of the sword. Yeah. So again, I think I'm not actually answering your question. I've
okay.
rolled away from transformation into introspection. How I see a really strong need for us to be much more brutally honest, not brutally honest, because I don't think brutal honesty is very useful a lot of the time, but to be much more honest with ourselves about the damage that we have done in our own lives, not so that we can just be forlorn about it, but to see how we can change those patterns, to choose our own transformation. And a lot of my life has been about that, because I certainly had, I came from a family with a lot of anger, and I had a lot of anger. I still have anger, but I have made it a priority to try to learn how to not do harm with my anger, but to do the healing that's necessary to rise above the battlefield.
I think that's a great answer. And even though you were like, didn't feel like you answered the question, I still feel like you did at first, because you took it and ran with it about sort of your own transformation and that introspection that I think it really calls for. So it makes sense to me.
Okay, good. Good.
Do you have a favorite story about Brigid, either from mythology or folklore? I'd like to ask people this question because it says a lot about the kinds of stories that they like, but it also opens up a pathway of learning different stories about Brigid, because there are so many, and also seeing that there are many different aspects of her too. So do you have a favorite story, or can you pick?
No, I don't have a favorite story. I have a lot of beloved stories, and I'm trying to think, this has been coming up for me, her connection to the voice, so the poet, obviously, in Brigid's time, you didn't just jot down your poems in a nicely flowered book. Your poems were created to certain patterns that you've learned, right? Certain oral tradition patterns to make them easier to remember. But they were said out loud. You would deliver your poetry out loud, and often I think poetry was sung as well. So why we don't call them songs, I'm not sure, but anyway. So there's that the goddess has that connection to the voice. She has also, there's, where does that's in Shannas Cormac, where we talk about the three sisters Brigid, who are daughters of the Dagda. There's also a story in Liorgola Erin, I think it is, where she's with the kings of the rams, the oxen, the boars. And then at the end of that, there's a very short thing where they say she is the one who created, I can't remember exactly how it says it, but I think it's a whistle for calling in the night or something. I've heard it described as a rape whistle, but there's absolutely nothing in it. It says nothing about rape. Right. I suspect it's really for communication, so when you're doing a cattle raid or whatever, you can right. And also there's the thing about demonic voices in that same story, although demonic just means probably pagan, right? But definitely not what we approve of as Christian scribes. So there's all of that about the goddess having something to do with the voice. There are a couple of things in St. Brigid's huge cornucopia of tales that are also to do with the voice. The one that's coming to my mind right now is about a girl. So St. Brigid is visiting these people, and she says something to the girl. I think she asks her what she wants to do with her life. Does she want to, take the veil or marry or what? And her mother says, there's no point in talking to her. She can't speak. She's 12, I think, years old, and she's never spoken. And St. Brigid is just, I'm going to talk to her, and I'm not going to go anywhere until she answers me. I don't want you to answer for her. I want her to answer me. And so, of course, eventually the girl does speak, and she says what she wants. I'll leave that as a cliffhanger. but remember, this is in one of the saints' lives, so you can probably guess what she wants. But the important thing for me is it's about our voice. All of these things have to do with, and again, the goddess Brigid, of course, this is the most popular one. I don't know about popular, but the most commonly referenced one is in the Kahmoitura, where her son Ruadan dies, that she raises the first keen herd in Ireland, right? So these are all, like, to me, really powerful expressions of how we can embody with our voice who we are and how we're reacting to the world around us, to the situation we find ourselves in. I know for myself, I have kept my mouth shut a lot in my life, having learned how much harm I could do not keeping my mouth shut. I have kept it shut a lot. But even back when I could throw a tantrum and say hurtful things, most of the time I kept myself quiet. I didn't show or say who I was or what I needed. I mean, my sisters will tell you a different story, I'm sure, but it is different with your sisters, isn't it? Right?
Yes, it is.
So, and that's a thing that I'm still grappling with, is how to be visible, but how to be audible, how to say what I want to say, and how to actually connect with what that is. Because I've found that often I'll say something, but it's not really entirely what I mean, or it might just be completely a deflection so that I don't look at what I really mean, because there may be some area of real pain that I'm avoiding, right? And to open up that keen that Brigid did so hugely. I have never heard the kind of keening that would have been heard then, but I certainly know what it means to unleash your voice and your emotions. I used to sing, for instance, and when you can really sing, when you can really get out of your own way, it's such a huge thing. Anyway, so voice, that's been coming up for me a lot. But there are so many stories that I like about her. Saint Brigid has one where this man he's a wealthy man, and there is a much less wealthy woman who he wants to basically have as his sex slave. They don't use those words, but that's what his intention is. And so he somehow arranges, I can't remember exactly how he arranges it. So that's the thing about my storytelling. It's not very rehearsed.
That's okay.
But he arranges for it to seem that a brooch that he lent her, or that was his and somehow was temporarily in her possession, has been stolen. So he's saying that she's stolen it, and unless he gets it back, she'll have to forfeit her own life to him. And Saint Brigid, who frequently comes to the aid of people who are, dire things are about to happen to them because of this huge inequality between the rich and the poor. She hears of it, and she comes and she finds he's actually broken it, I think, or no, he's just thrown it into the sea. So she finds it and restores it to him. And I can't remember if there's any justice in terms of him getting a slap on the wrist. Probably not, but she does save this woman. So that kind of thing, those stories where she intervenes, and those are all the saints. There's not a lot of stories about the goddess or goddesses, but they don't fall into that camp. Yeah, I love those.
Those are all great. And I can tell you, I will probably not look at my voice the same way after you explained it like that. And it's amazing to me because I am that person who, if I'm in the car by myself, my music gets turned up, my windows are rolled down, as long as it's not raining like it is right now. And I don't care who sees me, and I'm singing along to whatever music I want. And it's just, I've always been like that. And even, I sang in the choir in high school. I played flute in junior high and in elementary school. I'm relearning it now. But it's always been like an emotional release, a way for me to physically and verbally say how I'm feeling without having to put my own words to it, because sometimes that's really hard. And I also find it really empowering that Brigid is one that can help us use our voices in that manner, because she's like, excuse you, I'm a strong, powerful woman, goddess, saint, and I will show you how to use your voice, and you're going to do it because it's good for you, and this is what you need to do. That's very much how I see that.
Yeah. Voice is so important, and how we use it is, I mean, our voice can be a sword, right? And we can use that sword in really awesome ways, or not. So yeah, there's so much around voice.
Yeah. Well, I think we've covered a lot of stuff. Do you have anything else specifically that you would like to say about your writing or your book, about, or just about Brigid in general? Like, is there anything extra that you want the readers of your book to take away from it?
So many things popped into my mind. One thing is that I want people to know that whatever their path is with Brigid, that's their own unique story, and it's good. I quite a bit in the book and in blogs and all over the place, I say, well, this is actually UPG, and this is something that most of us believe, but it hasn't actually, it's a modern idea, stuff like that. So I sometimes worry that people will think, well, she only believes this and this and this are cool, and she disses the rest of us. And I actually don't feel that way. Like, I think Brigid is somebody, like we were saying, with so many sides to her, and obviously we're all going to have our own UPG about her. I'm sure there's no one on earth who has exactly the same relationship with her that I do, but that they're all valid. All I ask is that we try to claim what is our UPG, and be okay about learning that what we were told and have come to believe might not be true. Because that was a hard transition for me to make. But I think it's really freeing, that you mentioned the word community earlier, and I really do feel like we are a huge and wonderful community. Like, Brigid has had so much love from so many people for so many centuries, and here it is, just like ballooning into this huge, amazing, very variable thing. And it's just, I think it's wonderful. It feels like a big blanket, a quilt. a quilt to me. So yeah. It's a gift of love. The book is to her and to her devotees or anyone who's interested in her.
Wonderful. So I guess that is all, unless you have anything else that you would like to say. I would like to ask if you would tell people where they can find you online. Obviously online, Yeah,
that would be scary. Yeah. Get out. Yeah. And I just realized that I was supposed to organize that, but I didn't get you those links. But
that's okay. We could do that later.
Okay. I am on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. Mm-hmm. I teach classes. I have a website, which I think you have the URL to. And so my classes, there are links to them there. They're all about Brigid. And one is a huge one about poetry and Brigid. Where else am I? Pinterest, but I really haven't figured out Pinterest.
Like, I'm not a fan of Pinterest.
Is anybody out
there? That's how I feel sometimes posting on like Twitter. Like, okay, here's this post. Here, have it. I don't know if anybody's listening, but here you go.
I like seeing your posts, but I have the same feeling. Oh dear. But yeah, that's all I can think of off the top of my head. And I will get you those links.
Of course. And for anybody listening or watching, those links will be in the description if you're watching on YouTube, or in the show notes if you're listening to the podcast. Where can people find your book and when does it come out?
Well, that website of mine has a pre-order page that will take you to a lot of different places.
Okay.
Like not just Amazon. So there are different ones for the UK and North America and whatnot. I haven't got them all yet, but I've got what I can. And the book comes out on the 27th of August in the UK and the 1st of September in North America.
So it's coming up soon.
Very soon. And there'll be an ebook available somewhere around there too, but I haven't yet seen it.
So thank you so much, Mael Brigde, for joining me here around the Cauldron. It was lovely talking to you and hearing all about your book and about your experience with Brigid and the wealth of information that you have to share. Thank you to everybody that's watching or listening to this. And I hope you enjoyed it. And we will talk to you later. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Thank you again to Mael Brigde for being here and chatting with me about her book. I really do encourage everyone that is interested in Brigid and just learning more about her to pick up A Sun Among Stars, a Brigid of Ireland devotional. As always, thank you so much to my patrons over on Patreon. Your support is what helps keep me doing this thing that I enjoy doing. And I will talk to you next time.